here's a couple of things to think about with regard to business real estate, especially with family. And that is, again, the idea that, as an example, I have some deals where dad sells out at a low to moderate price, but if Sonny does well, he'd like something more. So how we do that is that we will set up in the lease a percentage rent deal. As they have in real estate, if you rent in a mall, the malls usually say if you do over X millions of dollars a sale, they get a kicker. You do the same thing with a family-owned real estate. You can do the same thing with family-owned real estate, where that if it's under X dollars, and then senior generation gets a kick from the additional rent. Now, the other thing that I just did for another client is I had a client that had shops down, small town in Georgia. They owned 2 shops, the real estate under it. They were very concerned, and they had their 2 daughters and their son-in-law in the business. They were extremely concerned of, if they sold the business, that their kids wouldn't have a job. But they had the real estate. So what did we do? They already had a real estate holding company. What we did was we set up a trust for the benefit of the 2 daughters. And we transferred 20% of the value of the real estate of the LLC into this trust. What did that do? It created income replacement equal to their salary. So they can then sell the business knowing that their kids were covered. Mom and dad continued to own 80%, but they also had the ability to strip off a portion of the income in the form of a management fee. So they wouldn't necessarily have to, if the real estate became more profitable than what they needed, they could strip off a portion of the income. And we're going to talk about trust taxation in a few minutes. But the idea here is that we took, this real estate was worth approximately $10 million. We transferred in 10% of it. However, because of minority discounts, valuation discounts, it only cost us $700,000 of gifting to get $1 million of real estate out of their estate, because the IRS does recognize minority discounts, lack of marketability, lack of control when you're valuing a gift. So they made a gift to this trust. Means going forward, whatever that $1 million grows to, $300,000 appreciation is already passed to the next generation, and anything that grows in that value afterwards is outside of their estate. So it's a way of doing income replacement using, if you have the real estate. The other point where we talked about here, and we're going to talk about this as well. One is, I have clients say, well, I've got 3 kids, I've got 3 pieces of real estate, I'm going to give each kid one piece of the real estate. Okay? That's great, as long as there isn't a fire at one of the 3, or the other one isn't condemned, or the other one it ends up going through the roof. The idea of having the children owning the real estate holding company and each owning 1/3 of that, then no child bears the market risk of any one of the real estate parcels going down in value. So the concept, and the other thing that I'm going to say about family transactions is, if you have children that are in the business and children outside of the business, you better figure out an equalization strategy. One of the things I tell clients today with estate planning is it's two issues. It's not what you leave your kids, it's how you leave it to them. Have you protected it for them? And secondly is you want Christmas dinner to be as pleasant after you're gone than before you left this earth. And the issue is putting children in debtor-creditor relationships or landlord-tenant relationships is not a way to foster that. So the idea of if you have children inside the business and outside the business, we're going to talk about some of that in a minute, but the idea here is that you need to build in an equalization strategy, because if one child is living off the rent from the store and the other child is trying to run the store, they sort of had an innate conflict of interest, which is another reason why I generally don't like the real estate going directly to the kids. I like a trustee there, and we're going to talk about trustees and stuff in a few minutes. But you can understand that the real estate can add also. If you are thinking of selling, don't lowball your rent, because it's going to come back to bite you when you try to get market rent from an acquirer outside of Gerber and Caliber. They have a formula. They're going to tell you it's X square feet, that it's X dollars per square foot that they pay you in rent. They actually, I don't know the exact number, but they basically look at rent should be some percentage of gross sales. And I can't remember the exact percentage. Yes, they don't fluctuate it. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Oh, really?
They basically say it should be X dollars per square, generally. I'm not saying that if you're in Manhattan as an example, that's not an issue, but I'm saying that overall they tend to look at, but what I'm saying is if you're going to a third party that's not a Gerber or Caliber, and you aren't charging close to market rent, how are you going to explain that to the guy coming in and saying, oh, by the way, your operating expenses are going to increase by 15% because my rent has been below market? You better deal with that either in an EBITDA adjustment beforehand, or you need to walk in with, and within the family scenario, if you're going to do a sale with family members, I strongly suggest you do a long-term lease with the business that has specified rent increases for an extended period of time. So if a child who is not an owner in the business can't jack up the rent arbitrarily. But you also need to provide is what happens if a child moves out of the area? Can the child not in the business at some point force the child who's in the business to buy the real estate? These are all issues that you need to deal with in some of the documentation. And as I talked about, right of first offer versus right of first refusal, far better right of first offer.